You can cheat on yourself, and you can try to suppress it, but but you cannot. You have seen it, and then there's no way back. It's not very healthy, to lie to yourself and say, no, I didn't see that. Yeah. But many people do, because it's simply too painful.
Now, more on the latest building collapse in New York. You might have heard a few moments ago, I was talking about the Salomon Brothers building collapsing. And indeed it has. It seems that this was not a result of a new attack. It was because the building had been weakened during this morning's attacks. We'll probably find out more now about that from our correspondent, Jane Stanley. Jane, what more can you tell us about the Salomon Brothers building and its collapse?
Well, only really what you already know. Details are very, very sketchy. As you can see behind me, the Trade Center appears to be still burning. We see these huge clouds of smoke and ash, and we know that behind that there's an empty piece of what was a very familiar New York skyline, a symbol of the financial prosperity of this city, but completely disappeared now, and New York is still unable to take on board what has happened to them today.
Presumably there were very few people in the Salomon building when it collapsed. I mean, there were, I suppose, fears of possible further collapses around the area.
That's what you would hope, because they don't really know where to turn. That's the very sad thing. I think there's going to be a lot of very, very traumatized people that has hit them very, very hard.
Jane, I think many of us, when we heard the news, perhaps on the radio earlier today, were completely flabbergasted by it and just couldn't comprehend it. I mean, it almost sounded too far-fetched. I was wondering what it's felt like for you being in Manhattan. Well, unfortunately, I think we've lost the line with Jane Stanley in Manhattan.
Now, here we're going to show you a videotape of the collapse itself.
Describe that.
Now we go to videotape, the collapse of this building. Amazing, incredible picture word.
Too far-fetched.
For the third time today, it's reminiscent of those pictures we've all seen too much on television before, when a building was deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down.
See what you see and not what you're supposed to see.
Tell us your name and what you do for a living.
Hi, I'm Maxwell Lahin, and I am a physicist, inventor, entrepreneur, and, well, I guess change maker. I'm 13, and I feel like I can change the world, and I've already started my positive impact on it.
What have you done? How have you changed the world so far?
So aside from inventing a whole bunch of different stuff that probably won't matter now, but my most recent thing, which has gotten me a little bit of attention online, is my energy device, where I extract electromagnetic energy from everything around us and convert it into electrical energy. In other words, a stream of unlimited energy. So, you know.
So, do you think you can solve our energy crisis here on planet Earth?
I believe I will, and I believe I already have solved the main problem. Now it's just a matter of, getting this out there.
And what do you need to be able to get this out there? You just need somebody to watch this video and say, here's some money, or what do you need?
Well, all I can think of really is support, Throughout history, people like me have been prosecuted and killed, murdered, and a lot of other very horrible things. And if I have support from a lot of people, I don't think that that will happen in our modern day and age. We're a little bit too civilized for that. So all I'm saying is that if you think the world should be a better place too, then, support.
Okay, so we started off by talking about my book, E = MC² and the New Definition of God, and you told me that you had already come to the same conclusion 3 years ago, and that my book was a dumbed-down version of your theory, which I think it's clearly the case. What is God?
So, a lot of... we're in the United Nations.
Okay. Yeah, and people walking around down in the basement here. Go ahead. What is God?
Okay, so a lot of people think God is, quite in the biblical sense, a guy sitting up on a cloud who controls the universe, frankly, and has created all life. But my definition of God is not like that. I don't believe God is a person or entity. God is just another form of energy, or actually is energy. Himself, well, not even himself, itself. For the fact that you look at the Bible and other really, awesome but extremely vague and unreliable sources in religion that, hold these sources that we find and facts that we find, or so-called facts that we find, and really a lot of people think it's just about faith. But if you relate the Bible to quantum physics and apply most of the laws actually in less of a figurative sense, but more of a literal sense, and replace it with things like the universe, you'll eventually find out that it explains in-depth quantum physics and astrophysics experiments and theories. Well, maybe not theories, because maybe now they're proven. Who knows? Maybe the Bible isn't a story of something that happened on Earth, but maybe a story of how our universe began. For the fact that, honestly, I don't really buy into the literal biblical sense, like, God is literally a guy who looks like us, who sits up in an alternate realm that's in our clouds and, watches over all of us. But I guess you could say that he's an energy form that created all, is all, and is everywhere and nowhere at the same time. God, or energy, lives within us, through us, and is us, frankly.
So you said what? That God is the energy that is in us, created us, and is us. Is that your definition?
Yep.
I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Sort of, yeah. God is energy. That's my thing. And I mean, like, you look at dimensional theory, and eventually we have, a singularity at the beginning of the universe that is energy, and then, eventually that begins to slow down in vibration due to entropy or some other law of that sort. And then, first you get photonic light, and then that slows down, and then we get matter, and then that slows down, and then who else knows what comes next? We have gravity, and then we have time, all coming in at one sense. I mean, does that sound like origin story to you? It kind of does a little bit to me, but, maybe that's just a coincidence. Maybe these philosophers, or unreliable monks, we call them, that lived up in the mountains and wrote this weird book that doesn't have any factual evidence behind it, maybe they were quantum physicists ahead of their time, and maybe they're just trying to tell people, who lived a crazy long time ago, that there is an entire new quantum world out there. But, education wasn't too good back then, so I guess they had to simplify intense quantum physics to something that a 5-year-old could understand. Thus the Bible, right?
So you're saying people who believe in the Bible as written, as the Bible, conventionally, are kind of like 5-year-olds?
Well, 500 years ago? No, sorry, 1,000 years ago, probably. But, more of like, I'm saying, maybe in the sense of not really, like, I honestly don't want to insult anybody at all. So, just saying that it's a coincidence. It's not fact. I'm not saying anything's anything. I have a very religious grandmother, so,
I have to tell you, I let you kind of struggle with this because I realized the question was a little bit perhaps impolite to some people. And the way you handled that was a way that my political and business clients, if they did it as well as you, I'd be incredibly proud. So the bottom line is that we keep evolving, right? And the Bible was written and different ways to interpret it. Now, you said something about the Bible and using the letters going backwards in the Fibonacci theory. Can you explain that? Because that's amazing.
In certain parts of the Bible, you can get literally, if
Speak a little louder if you
the
can.
Fibonacci sequence, if you invert, of course. But in certain important parts of the book, you'll take certain parts out and you'll get numbers, which seem random, but they're actually frequencies of resonance that line up with what's called the Fibonacci spiral. And the Fibonacci spiral is kind of weird for the fact that it's called literally God's thumbprint, which is a little bit weird considering that we have spiral galaxies, spirals in our thumbs, spirals in our ears. Literally, almost every organism on the planet or object we have found has had some sort of reminiscence of Fibonacci in it. And I don't know, it's called God's trademark or God's thumbprint, but I don't know. It's just a coincidence, I guess.
So if you're the reincarnation of anyone, who do you think it would be, or who would you like it to be?
I honestly think that I'm Max Lawton, and that's who I am. So I'm going to say Max Lawton. But I'm very proud of and quite a big fan of Nikola Tesla. I mean, I'd like to be the reincarnation of him, but honestly, I think I'm just a student of his many teachings.
That's amazing. What's the favorite thing that he has invented or theorized about for you?
Honestly, I really like his work with electrostatic pulses when he harnessed Tesla coil powers and used it to wirelessly transfer energy through people, around people, and how he could like light himself on fire but not be hurt by it, and that was pretty crazy. So I really like that.
That's very cool. So just a couple more questions. You're extraordinarily inspiring, and I agree with you on your definition of God, and wrote a children's book that basically says that. But you then, before when we were talking about infinity and different universes, and so we've kind of identified God. God is energy, right? All the energy in the universe, that's God. It's not a guy in the sky, it's energy.
Energy isn't something that you just have. Energy is all and can't be. Not all the energy in the universe, it's energy. Energy happens to consume the entire universe and every other parallel dimension or universe that can ever exist in our dimensional reality, but...
Are there other universes? Are there other dimensional realities?
Dimensional realities? I'm not sure if we can prove that yet, but we do know that there are other dimensions.
Okay, how do you know that?
Well, there's an infinite number of numbers, which means there's an infinite number of frequencies that we can calculate. And if there's an infinite number of frequencies that we can calculate, that means there's an infinite number of frequencies that mass can take. And if mass can take an infinite number of frequencies, there must be an infinite number of dimensions. Or if you're one of those string theory guys, if there's 10, or if you're an M theory guy, you say it's 11 dimensions. But as of right now, I'm just beginning to question.
Down in California.
Jack, this was the result of a formula which was given to me by a man who landed a ship at my airport in 1953. And we put this formula under research, tested a number of experiments on a bench in a good electronics lab in Chicago, and we produced phenomenal results with evidence that we should do it on a larger scale in order to be able to do more with it. And this evolved out of something that started in 1953 into a 4-story high machine that we're working on down here today.
Now, George, I don't care whether the machine is 4 stories high or 40 stories high or 4 inches high. When I say calmly and unexcitedly, a time machine, what does your formula tell you you can do with a time machine?
Well, Jack, our formula has no time factor, which electronic formula does have. And on the other hand, electronic science has only had 2 dimensions to work with, the electric pattern and the magnetic pattern perpendicular to it. And we discovered a 3rd zone, which we call a time zone, and we are working through this zone with an effort to orient the magnetic field to give us other results than our science can obtain at present.
George, it's double talk to me. A time machine means to me a little box that I can go into and go back 5,000 years or forward 10,000 years. Is that what your formula tells you can do?
Well, Jack, this isn't a little box. This is a 4-story machine focusing fields that we can orient to produce this zone big enough for a man to get into. It isn't a box.
But what happens to the man when he gets into the zone? I'm
Well,
all agog with curiosity.
Jack, we've discovered this zone is subject to thought. Now, since time doesn't record events the way we do on calendars and clocks, you could only record an event by thinking of it. Now, theoretically, we believe we can take a videotape magnetic camera into the time zone and photograph Lincoln's Gettysburg Address or Caesar's armies marching. Clocks, you could only record an event by thinking of it. Now, theoretically, we believe we can take a videotape magnetic camera into the time zone and photograph Lincoln's Gettysburg Address or Caesar's armies marching or anything that's ever happened.
All right, let me get this straight. In other words, you're telling me, like H.G. Wells imagined 50 years ago, that everything that happened in time is still there to be seen by the recreation electronically of a thought which exists.
Jack, you know how you talk into a tape on a tape recorder and play the interruptions back, identical to the play that you made. The Earth's magnetic field is the same way. You can put interruptions into it and play them back out of it. An associate of ours in creating a magnetic coupler with this principle coupled in the Earth's magnetic field and played back TV shows from stations that aren't even in business anymore.
You mean an experiment has been done to bring out of the air television programs which have been and gone?
Been and gone.
Now, where was this experiment conducted?
It was conducted in Santa Monica by an associate of mine.
Why hasn't this hit the headlines throughout the world? That's a time machine in action, if I can...
Jack, the reason it hasn't hit the world is because, as I understand it now, the Navy Department took him and the research over because he also discovered he could bounce magnetic echoes off the ionosphere and locate submarines under the ocean, regardless of where they were.
So who is this associate of yours?
This is a fellow named Charlie Arts.
Charlie Arts?
Yeah.
And is he a free man walking around today?
Well, he's free where he is in this...
5 to 8 hertz frequency has been determined to be nearly the precise center of the entire electromagnetic color spectrum. There's only one number in the entire numbering system whereby the electromagnetic color spectrum is the same as the sound system. That one number is 528. Both the same in color and sound. 5 to 8 hertz frequency.
A miraculous key that opened doors that no man can close and closed doors that no man can open. 528. It will change your life in the most beneficial way. And now we have substantive evidence, massive amounts of evidence that is what 528 is. Ultimately, what has happened with this planet is that we are in dissonance to another note, another frequency. It turned out that when we discovered the original musical scale, there was not just 6, but a total of 9 core creative frequencies to the universe. That is, everything in the universe is made from 9 notes, only 9. And that the first 6 are the solfeggio, and then there's 3 additional ones that form a perfect circle of sound. And that perfect circle of sound looks something like this. If you graph it. So the first 6 notes, 396, 417, 528, 639, 741, 852, was the original solfeggio scale. The 528 that you can see on my left in green is the color green. It's the heart of the rainbow. That's the miracle note from the original solfeggio note, from the original solfeggio scale. And the other note that you see, 741, which is part of nature, is called the devil's interval in musicology. That when you play 741 with 528, it creates such a annoying and dissonant energy, diseasing, stressful, that if you continue to listen to it, you could die. And so that the concept here is interesting. In the world today, we have people who are controlling virtually everything economically, geopolitically. Their agenda has been population manipulation, population control for millennia. They have held the secret knowledge, the ancient music, by which the pyramids were constructed based on the math. All of the universe is constructed according to these 9 tones. They knew about them. In fact, they instituted. In fact, it was the Rockefeller Foundation in 1939 that instituted the world's standard tuning. The Western world tunes to a 440 hertz frequency. That when you tune your instrument to that, the F sharp note is 741. Precisely.
The A440 is what now is the standard tuning. If you go A439, you're closer to one of the Creator's tones. If you go A441, you're closer to one of the Creator's original tones. That's how precisely it has been manipulated. To do what? To shut down the 95% of your brain, particularly the right brain that operates the heart mind for the divine human communion. Here is a metaphor so that you begin to understand what we're talking about. When you go driving your car and your channel on the radio is tuned to a station and you're grooving to the music, you love that music. As you get farther and farther away from the broadcasting tower, that music gets static. You start to lose the signal from the clear channel, broadcast, and it gets staticky. When it gets staticky, you get a little annoyed. But you want to listen to it. You really have a heart for that music, so you continue to listen to it for another 10, 15 miles, and suddenly it becomes so annoying that you just get disgusted, you go, ah, and you shut it off. And if you continue to listen to it, you get sick. That's what we're talking about here. Except you don't even know that you've been listening to the static your whole life. You don't even know what the true resonant frequency is because it has been kept from you. So in other words, the master composer, master conductor of the Universal Orchestra is singing love songs in 5/8, uplifting everything simultaneously. And we're the only species out of tune and accepting static for the clear channel. Dr. Masaru Emoto. He goes up on stage and he has a triangular, a musical triangle that he hits, like in an orchestra. He's hitting it over here. He hits it, bing, and about 30 yards or 30 feet away is his interpreter standing here with the same exact replica of that same size triangle. Frequency tuned to the same frequency. And he tells his interpreter to put a microphone next to it. And suddenly this one starts to resonate. He hits that one over there. This one starts resonating. How much of your body is full of water? They used to say when I was at Harvard School of Public Health, the truth was back then about 86% of your body, well hydrated, was water. Today they tell us it's only 75%. Hogwash, you've been dehydrating everybody with the poisons. 93% of the function of DNA is light and sound reception and transmission. Photon-phonon reception, transmission for intercellular communication and cellular upregulation. You know what cellular upregulation means? It means precipitation. And then now, every millisecond, instant second, you're remanifesting right now in water. Water is the most energy conductive of all of the materials. It's a superconductor. Let me give you the fundamental, the rudimentary origin of the numbers. Here it is. The most important numbers, 3 6s and 9s. Again, Tesla said, Tesla, who created Tesla coil. Tesla coils, energy amplifiers. Your DNA is an energy amplifier, a coil, operating by the 3, 6s, and 9s primarily. For those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, you've probably looked at engines or motors, magnets that have been wound with copper wire. When you do that, when you wind the copper, coil the copper around the magnet, it enhances the energy dramatically. That's what your DNA is. It's an antenna to the Creator. Every single cell of your body has this energy capability. It has this divine intelligence. What does that mean? That means the first entities that you should be communing with in order to uplift yourself, sustain yourself, heal yourself, is the billions of cells in your body that have its own unique genetic intelligence, its own sacred spiral to the Creator. And so this is the structure of the way that the universe operates, which does fabulous for us, our understanding of some of the most wonderful pieces of information to allow us to live a faithful life. A life according to the law, according to the matrix. Here is the simple way to analyze this. You've heard of what goes around comes around. You've heard of as you sow, so shall you reap. So this explains it. Let's say that you're here and you are putting out negative thoughts, negative behaviors, negative actions. It's all energy. The neurology in your brain's powerful. 86% of you is God water. So now that's going out, and it goes out, and here's what happens. It goes out, it goes up and down. This is called the event horizon. You shoot down through the middle of the event horizon, which is the black hole, comes out and spins back around, ultimately comes right back, bringing to you karma, bringing to you divine judgment. It's all according to the mathematical.
In the modern day, we're taught that Chicago was built in the 1800s, but there's so much with that narrative that doesn't add up that it leads us to believe that there's something that was left out of the official history books. In 1605, a map published in Venice shows North America with many old world cities. Notice that the symbol to represent these cities is some type of red castle. Supposedly at the time that this was written, there was no English-speaking settlements on the North American continent. In the middle of the continent, past the end of the St. Lawrence River, appears the name Shalaga. And we can see this in a variety of different maps. It's right in the exact same place that Chicago would appear, and obviously, the name is extremely close. In 1894, the Chicago Tribune actually mentioned Shalaga being on a map from 1615. Chicago or Shalaga on an old map. Quote, President Harper of the University of Chicago has lately received a quaint map of the world. This map was presented to President Harper by Dr. Charles Richter, the Imperial German Representative Commissioner to the World's Fair. Now isn't that interesting? It continues, the following letter of presentation accompanies the map. Quote, W.R. Harper, President of the University of Chicago. Dear Sir, when during the early preparatory stages of the exposition work efforts were made mainly upon the investigation of Mr. Curtis to collect maps, supposition be correct, it is most likely on this map the name of Chicago in its original form appears for the first time. Quote, Herr Professor Graf of Dresden, who has taken a prominent interest in the researches to which the Chicago Exposition and the historic events underlying its existence have given so powerful an impulse, has upon a request arranged for a photographic reproduction of the maps in question. And as the representative of this commission and on behalf of Herr Professor Graf, I have the honor to request you to accept a copy of the same with the request that you give it an appropriate place in your university. And with the hope, also, that it will prove the warm interest that Germany has taken of old in that far-off period of history. I trust that you will accept this small token of esteem in the spirit in which it is given, as a mark of appreciation, however inadequate, of the energetic efforts that are being made towards the propagation of science and education by the Chicago institutions generally, and your university especially, and as a manifestation of the interest which German scientists have taken." End quote. Okay, so Dr. Charles Richter was the Imperial German Representative Commissioner to the World's Fair, and it seems that he was trying to write to the university professor and attempt to speak about Schlaga appearing on old maps, and he even alludes to it having a connection with Germany. Obviously, there was some interest by people who knew none of the origins of the World Fairs into Chicago's ancient origins. But this is kind of where it gets even crazier. The newspaper actually had a follow-up 6 days later where they attempt to cover this whole thing up. Let's remember now that we understand the orphan asylums and that most of these people, especially the journalists and the German migrants, they wouldn't know the full history of this city. That knowledge would only be known by the secret orders who own the buildings and perhaps some higher-ups at these colleges. Now the headline in the newspaper reads, "Schlaga is not the same as Chicago." Someone named C.F. Gunther writes in and says, quote, "In the Tribune of Sunday, there appeared a map lately sent to President Harper of the University by Dr. Charles Richter, Imperial German Representative Commissioner, which is supposed to represent the oldest appearance of the name of Chicago, namely 1615. As no one questions this assumption, I am frank to say that it is unquestionably an error in every respect. It is not true that the so-called Schlaga on this map is at the exact point where the marvelous city is now located, but on the contrary, the country is marked Mexicana. Again, the so-called St. Lawrence River is not so far south. This river was well known at the time and should be at the top of the map. Hence, this is also a far-fetched assumption. It is self-evident that no one would put Chicago on a river running up in Mexico, for Chicago, situated on a chain of lakes nearly 1,000 miles long, omitting these lakes entirely and place it on a river going into Mexico. He continues trying to prove this Mexico argument and that Schlaga is actually spelled Shalapa. Now, this makes it very obvious that they didn't want this to be looked into at all, because the truth is, Schlaga is not spelled Shalapa, and it's on several maps in the 1500s. Many of the maps that show Schlaga closer south have been distorted, as with the German plate, but there are maps that show it in its correct position. Also, just because the map said Mexicana doesn't mean anything. In fact, Mexicana is said to have been all of California, Florida, Nova France, Norumbega, Quivira, and many more. It wasn't literally just in Mexico. And it's very strange that someone at the university actually said this and ignored that Schlaga is actually accurately placed on Mercator's map, so there's obviously some type of cover-up going on. Also, another argument made is that Hochelaga appears on several maps, and that Schlaga is some corruption of that, but I think Hochelaga must have been some type of smaller settlement made around the ruins of Schlaga, possibly by cannibalistic tribes as mentioned in many books around this time. But this got me looking into the University of Chicago, and just take a look at this building, which was also graciously funded by John D. Rockefeller. So yeah, it's another castle, but just think about it. Why would the college try to cover up Schlaga? Well, it's because the officials, or those who were in control of Chicago at the time, were secret society orphans who had repopulated the city and educated the population. By this time in 1890, most of Chicago's population was transported in, and the people had no clue who actually built these structures. Just look at the University of Chicago's emblem in 1890. Looks like we have a griffin in flames. Maybe they're trying to tell us something? They tell us that Chicago was raised afoot because of swampland flooding. They tell us that they built a tunnel under the Chicago River. They tell us that there was a great fire, yet when we look at the old pictures of Chicago, it looks like a bomb went off. They tell us that Chicago's World Fair was built in less than 3 years. Even if this was done with plaster, this would have been a massive undertaking. Just look at these structures. Does this look temporary to you? The purpose of these fairs were to indoctrinate, and I wouldn't be surprised if people began asking questions. Look at Dr. Charles. He obviously was curious to Chicago's ancient origins, since it has been depicted in maps, and they were probably curious about who built all these structures, and so maybe the officials decided that they had to get rid of it, so they destroyed everything. These structures were not built in the 1800s. Chicago was an old world Tartarian city. It's even on Mercator's map from 1569, so why when you look up Schlaga does it say that it's only on a map in 1605? Very strange, right? And on the Mercator's map, there's a series of texts with Latin legends that actually talk about Tartaria. He mentions the Tartars almost 20 times on this map, and it's possible that they're the actual source for where Mercator actually got his info. He talks about a King John who had taken over the country of Tartaria, and basically in order to quell rebellion, he decided to disperse them into different countries, breaking their power of rebellion. But the Tartars were unwilling to give up their kinship, and of mutual association, they made a vow and fled to the northward, where they seized a very vast country. So Mercator was well aware of the Tartarians, and if they had complete control of the east, it's not that far of a stretch to assume that they would attempt to pass the Bering Strait. If we look at Arzareth, which is the land beyond the Great River, far away from the habitation of man, in which the 10 tribes of Israel will dwell, observing the laws of Moses until the time of restoration, Arzareth was clearly in Tartaria, right by the Bering Strait. The Tartarians, then trying to flee whatever king or parasites were trying to take over, they crossed into America and began creating cities, one of them being Shalaga. In America, being the latest and most accurate description of the New World, we actually have a paragraph that speaks of this exact situation. Quote, "The other Tartary, which certainly was the first nursery, from hence the Americans were transplanted. Tartary, or Tatary, so called from the river Tatar, which runs through the country Mongol into the Northern Ocean, covers a great part of the terrestrial globe. The lesser Tartary takes out a considerable part of Europe, the greater is Asia." Now we must inquire from what Tartars the Americans extracted. Mornius, Postellus, Jean-Bardus, Poterus, and others are of the opinion that the Tartars, which about the year 1228, under the command of Zingis Khan, overspread the earth like a deluge, where the successors to the 10 tribes of Israel, which were carried into captivity to Assyria by Salmanazar, the Tartary, or rather Tartaria, seems to be some testimony thereof, because it signifies in the Syrian or Hebrew tongue remnants or remainders, as seemingly because these Tartarians were remainders of the forementioned tribes. End quote. So you tell me, what do you think? Is Chicago the ancient mythical city of Shalaga? If we connect this with the Chicago World Fair, then it actually starts to make a lot more sense. Do you guys have any finds to share on Shalaga? Well, I hope you guys enjoyed this one.
Did you know that California was once an island with its own queen and democracy? Before the Great Flood of 1802, which swept the entire continent and eventually receded the waters in California, the word Cali is a pronoun made up of 2 words. Cali applying to heat, to recast, to give a different form by melting it down and reshaping it, and Phorinia, which is furnace in Macedonian. When these 2 words are joined together, it will be applying a heat to a furnace to recast it. So both of these words, Kali and furnace, are Macedonian words still in use today. And heat of a furnace was applied to melt down existing Tartarian building structures and to recast it and reshape the area into a new man-made wasteland called Death Valley in California. These locations prior to the Great Flood were Tartarian city strongholds and unique Tartarian architecture, which housed millions of people from previous civilizations. And prior to the Great Flood, all of those buildings in the cities were melted down by DEW, direct energy weapons, and afterwards turned into dust like the Twin Towers in New York. So all the traces of previous civilizations were eradicated. There was a note found, interestingly, in a really old farmhouse in the northern US states from a woman, and it was dated 1749. And it said, essentially, "We never thought that the thousands of earthquakes would ever stop, but one day they just stopped, and the big lakes were empty. One in Canada, very large Salt Lake, and Peru Lake, all drained, wiped out of the natives and many of the people in Americas. The land was all changed completely since after then. So the powers just moved in and assumed the land of their own. Those 1,000 earthquakes were caused by the DEW, turning everything into dust or melting it down, which happened not only across America but all around the world. When the ground surface dust was washed away by the Great Flood, the waters receded back with huge volumes of mud, well known in history as the mud flood, which buried buildings halfway into the ground. This is why you see many of London's buildings closer to the city centre, which were from the previous empire, underground. So after the Great Reset happened, all the 5-meter tall breatharian people had been disposed of, because Tartarians were breatharians without a digestive tract or gastrointestinal tract. When those people were disposed of by the Great Flood and the energy weapons, they were replaced by hybrids of 3-meter tall, which were initially breatharians, but they were inserted with a gastrointestinal tract in their stomach, which starts from the mouth to the anus. Soon after, the new hybrids were created and introduced. These people needed food and water to survive, and that's where we are today. Since the Great Flood passed and the reset happened, gradually the people in the world were replaced by a newly created genetically modified species of hybrid humans, and that is what they're trying to do now with the whole injection thing. You know what I'm talking about. They are trying to tamper with the DNA and create essentially a 2.0 human DNA by reprogramming the genetics. The offspring of these people who have had the thing, right, will not have humans, and if they do, they won't be given the God-given genetics. There will be some tampering with. This is down-regulating genetics externally. They can change people's genetic code using the internet. So this is all for controlling and transgressing humans. Thank you for listening.
There's a movement right now to desensitize the world to the sexualization of children. This was my moment, really, of epiphany, where I never saw those two worlds so closely connected. This criminal network, because the culture has their back, they're bolstered now in ways I've never seen. I never dreamed there'd be a day that that ideology would be seeped into the mainstream of our American culture. These things are being taught in mainstream therapy conferences. Kids who are sexually active, kids meaning 5-year-olds. These legitimate mainstream conferences, they're coming out, they're teaching the exact opposite of, they're the enemy. They've declared war, and you know what we said back? Declaration accepted. We'll leave the porch light on. Come on over.
global profit from human trafficking is around $32 billion.
Luring women into slavery and prostitution and taking children to sell them.
And he's looking to traffic Ukrainian war victims in through Mexico into his pedophile market.
A child can't understand what's happening. A child can't say yes to such a thing.
Was able to make contact with this suspected child predator.
My undercover persona is introduced to him as a guy who traffics kids out of Ukraine. We have Ukrainian undercover operators for the first time.
And I was supposed to be believable that I'm young, naive.
With makeup, I can make her look like she's 12, and she'll be the bait. We now have a list of his lieutenants, and we don't know where they are, but we think he certainly knows where they are.
And we're focusing in on that location where this group have created a sex hotel.
They produce child rape videos of little boys.
The next 6 hours are critical because this is when all the pieces need to come into play.
This is trafficking, not prostitution. That these are victims, not volunteers. This is not something out of a Hollywood movie.
Of a time when the moon did not exist. Democritus and Anaxagoras mention that there was a time when no moon could be seen in the night skies. In describing the history of the Greek regions of Arcadia, Aristotle writes that the Pelasgians lived in an area since very old times, at a time when the moon did not exist. Apollonius from Rhodes mentions something similar. He talks about a time when not all of the celestial objects existed in the sky, before the time of Decameron's and Pyrrha's generation, before the cataclysm, when the moon did not exist and the only humans that existed were the Pelasgians, living on the mountains of Arcadia, region in Greece. These inhabitants of Arcadia were also known as the Proselenists, meaning those that were before the moon in Greek. Proselenists. In Plutarch's work, Moros, we find the following. There were Arcadians of Evander's following, the so-called pre-lunar people. Similarly, Ovid wrote, the Arcadians are said to have possessed their land before the birth of Zeus, and the folk is older than the moon. Stephanus of Byzantium wrote, Arcadians and females both exist before the moon. Hippolytus refers to the legend that Arcadia brought forth Pelagius of greater antiquity than the moon. Lucianus in his astrology says that the Arcadians affirm in their folly that they are older than the moon. Evidence has also been found in other parts of the world. In Bolivia, symbols on the walls of the courtyard of Calasaya, built in 1300 BC, provide evidence that the moon came into orbit around the Earth at a specific moment in time thousands of years ago, long before what mainstream historians refer to as recorded history. Moreover, the calendar gate in the same site provides evidence that a smaller satellite once rotated around the Earth. The oral traditions of Colombian Indians of the Bogota Highlands in the eastern Cordilleras of Colombia refer to a time before the moon. In the earliest times, when the moon was not yet in the heavens, says the tribesman of Chibchas. Africa also provides its own evidence. According to Zulu legend, the moon was brought hundreds of generations ago by two brothers of alien form, Wowane and Mpanku. What does it all mean? The ancient memory of an earth inhabited by humans without a moon has been passed from generations to generation, forming the traditions of numerous civilizations. How did the moon get there? Is it part of the earth? A planet that entered the Earth's magnetic field? Was it naturally formed or made by some lost civilization? Well, like I said, I'll leave this link. You can do some more research. That's, really what I want to do. I don't want to ever claim anything as being absolutely true. I think, today with the internet and people's own desire, you can find that information on your own. Everyone has access to Google. Everyone can do their own research and find more information on this. I just want to introduce people to a lot of these stories or incidences that the mainstream media chooses to ignore, even though I believe that, they do have significance.